Welcome back to Petty Astrology. I'm your host, Kaycee Felton-Lui, and it has been an interesting week, to say the least. But if you've been listening to me for any amount of time, you've probably heard me say that is just how 2024 is. And yeah, it's been pretty exciting so far, and I think that there's a lot more excitement to come because this is a year of transition. We are moving into new energy. And that means that we have a lot of realizations happening. We have a lot of moving from one place to another energetically. And that can be an uncomfortable experience. And we're doing all of that in the midst of everything else that's happening because nothing happens in isolation. It's all connected. Because we're all connected. We're having a shared human experience, whether we like it or not. But one thing that I wanted to say is that despite everything that's going on, the political theater that's happening, I want us to remember that it's very easy to get distracted with the circus. There is a lot going on. I don't think that people should not be aware of current events or stay in touch with the news and the broad strokes, but I don't think that we should be constantly putting information in our head and constantly searching out that information and just staying so activated, anxious, plugged in that we're not doing anything else, because that's the opposite of what we need to be doing right now. We are getting ready for Pluto to move into Aquarius for the next 2 decades, and that's happening in November. So right now we have Pluto retrograde in Aquarius. It's going to be moving back into Capricorn in September, and then we get a couple of months of this goodbye, and it's going to be a lot of big systemic change, a lot of cultural shifts, a lot of moments where we're all looking at each other like, oh my God, is this really happening? But that's the kind of year that we're having. So if you find yourself getting distracted, getting swept up in the circus of it all, I want to remind us that we can check in. We can know the moves that are being made, but we can put our focus on what we have power over. And that's taking care of ourselves, the people around us, especially in our physical location, like our communities, our physical communities, building connections with the people around you, especially physically, and educating ourselves on liberation movements and tactics, and also learning new skills. Those are all really important things that each and every one of us needs to be doing right now. Because with Pluto in Aquarius, the key to getting ourselves out of this in a better position is going to be cooperating and collaborating with larger groups of human beings. And we need a lot of skills to be able to do that effectively. We also need to be making sure that we're taking care of our health and the health of people around us. I want to remind people that we are in a massive COVID surge. In fact, the summer numbers that we are seeing, and the data is not being as well tracked as it used to be, but even still, the numbers right now blow last summer out of the water. It is not going away. COVID is not just going to disappear. No matter what politicians or compromised health institutions are telling us, like, it's not over. It's not over. And not to add on, but the reality is that there's more to come. If you have been following H5N1 at all, there was a very unsettling news dump that happened this past Friday. And it does look like scientists that have been keeping an eye on this are very correct in that this is also not just going to disappear. It's not really being managed very well. And typically when news is dumped on a Friday evening, this is news that they really don't want the public to sit in or pay too much attention to. They're like, oh, everybody's going to go enjoy their weekend, so we're going to dump this significant news and hope for the best. But we're seeing more people that work with livestock becoming infected. And the thing that we're kind of watching for now is person-to-person transmission, because the death rate for H5N1 is really alarming. Really alarming. And apparently there is a vaccine for this, but I don't know if you guys remember, but not too long ago, I was talking about how I saw this being something that we needed to keep an eye on the horizon. It's going to affect food costs. It's going to affect a lot more than that. if things keep going the way that they're going. So, why am I telling you this? Well, I want to remind you that the government isn't trying to protect us. They're interested in the circus and maintaining their own power, and not really in bettering the lives of constituents, the people that they supposedly represent. Like, that's not really important to them. And so it's really on us and the communities that we're part of to take care of each other. And we're doing a really bad job of that collectively. I am mystified that so many people aren't taking care of themselves, let alone the people around them. But both COVID and H5N1 can be prevented with quality masks. So that's like KN94s, KN95s, and N95s that are not counterfeit and that fit you well. Those will provide a lot of protection for you from COVID and H5N1. And these are both things that cause people to become disabled or even die. And so, if we want to build community, if we want to build a better world, it's going to have to start with us taking care of ourselves and the people around us in really practical ways. So, it may seem like a kind of a minor thing, but with the way that things are going, I think it's one of the most radical and honestly one of the most simple things that we can be doing to take care of each other. Because if you look at the history of colonization, disease has been a tool of colonization. And just because, you have the best intentions doesn't mean that you can't be a vehicle for that weapon to be used against you and the people around you. So again, we just really need to draw our focus to what is within our control. I get it. The memes have been very funny, and it is interesting to see where everything is going, but we really can't get lost in it because there's so much at stake. There's so much at stake, and we have so much to gain by doing things differently, by challenging ourselves to take more actions that align with our values. Because what are values if they just live in your head, and then in practice, the way that you live your life, you fuck people over, or you just kind of are careless with your own health or with their health? That's really not laying the foundation for a better world. That's more of the same. That's colonizer bullshit. So, if you're listening to this, I just want to encourage you that even small actions like wearing a mask are going to make a huge difference as we go forward. Because all we really have is each other. That's what solidarity is about, showing up for each other, even if it might be a little bit inconvenient or a little bit unpopular or a little bit uncomfortable. But I believe in us, and I know we can do it. Today on the podcast, I am joined by astrologers Mackenzie Wollenzine and Jen Russell to talk about Cancer and Capricorn energy in continuation of our Sister Sign series. Then stay tuned for the astrology of the week ahead, including me getting you ready for that big Capricorn full moon on July 21st. Welcome back to Petty Astrology. We have two brand new people on the podcast today. You guys have never been on Petty Astrology before, right?
No, I'm so excited to be here for the first time ever in my life.
I know, that's wild. Today we're going to be talking about Cancer and Capricorn, which I am very excited about because this is another where we are well represented with this energy. So I have a Cancer rising and a Capricorn moon. Jen, what do you got?
I got a Cancer moon and a Capricorn Mars.
Slay.
Yes, and I have a Cancer Mars, and I've got that Uranus Neptune conjunction in Capricorn, but not quite personal.
Yeah, same. Us millennials, we've got it going on here today with this energy. We know it well. We love it. We hate it sometimes. Mostly we love it, I think. So let's get into it. Let's start with Cancer. So first of all, Cancer is a water sign. It is also a cardinal sign, and it is ruled by the moon and typically symbolized by the crab. And it's also associated with the fourth house in astrology, and it governs the breasts and the stomach. Ooh la la. So, what comes to mind when you guys think of Cancer?
Home. Like very, very innately just like, and the mother, and just feeling like held, and also associated with like family, and just sort of like those very, very close, like, I guess like blood relations. Um, and also just being cozy, and like the emotional support that you get from people that you're around. It's not always, our families aren't always like great, so there's like some sort of always kind of like association with maybe like issues with mother, or conflict in the family, or like family patterns as well. There can be, you know so when I think of Cancer, it does feel like nurturing, but it also can be, I don't know, on another end, like smothering in a way. So
Right,
there's
right. There's a
it's like,
fine line between nurturing and smothering, isn't there?
yeah.
What about you, Mackenzie?
Yeah, I also think of like home and family and like, like baked goods and stuff like that. But then I also think of like the protective mama bear energy. Like I just think of Cancer just being so like protective, and that can also be like almost like helicopter mom, but
Mm,
just like very protective and nurturing and like warm and loving, and just like where you go when you need that feeling of like, needing to cry on someone's shoulder, like that kind of feeling, just like feeling held and supported emotionally. And also like that sensitivity that Cancer
mm.
energy can be, like just very, very sensitive. It's like that crab underneath its shell, like it's just like that, like gooey flesh. It's just like super, super, super sensitive, and that's not a bad thing. But yeah, just
Yeah.
like that sensitivity and emotional nature of Cancer as well.
Well, we have three Cancerians here. So, how many of us have ever been called too sensitive?
Oh yeah.
Probably all of us.
Yeah.
Present.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, that leads us to talking a little bit about the stereotypes that come with Cancer energy. And I know that crybaby is one of them.
Oh yeah.
So, with Cancer energy, there is absolutely that sensitivity there. And there is this association with crying with Cancer. And for me, as a Cancer rising, that is like a release valve for me. And like I will cry. I remember I went to a Beyonce concert in 2016, and I was like not very well funded at the time. So we were like in the nosebleeds, and I was so like overwhelmed by the emotions of that experience that I was like just sobbing the entire concert. I was having the best time. I was not sad at all. And I just was so like overwhelmed by the production and the music and the environment that I was just like I could not. It was actually kind of embarrassing cuz I was like just could not stop crying. And so I think that people kind of have this misconception that crying is either a sign of weakness or it's just like annoying and something that we do for attention. How do you guys feel about that?
I mean, as a crybaby coming from me, it really is just a release valve. It's just kind of like if I don't have a good cry, like at least once a week, it's almost like I feel like congested emotionally. I don't know if that makes
Mm,
sense. Just kind of like
yeah,
stuffed up. Like I need to have like a nice cry at least once a week. And, I cry even like I cry when I'm mad, I cry when I'm sad, I cry when I'm
same.
happy. Like,
Hmm.
I don't know if that's like also like a first house moon thing, but
Mm,
yeah, it's just like, and like crying is not the only emotion. Like, it's just, one of many. But yeah.
but it's our personal water, which is funny because Cancer is a water sign and it is this like water valve. It is our bodies making water come out of our faces. Which is funny too, because the moon in Cancer, and when I think of Cancer, I also think of the moon, and I do think of like the face in the moon and like mother smiling down at us.
Yes, that's mother.
And as a Cancer rising, like I have the honor of like seeing that in my own face, or like other Cancer risings, is like that glow, that orb, and then we can make water come out of our face. It's like more metal, I think, than people give us credit for. But, maybe I'm biased on that one. But yeah, I agree. Totally a release valve. And I don't think we talk enough about like how good it can feel after you cry. It's like this release of energy and something that you're feeling emotionally is transmuting through the physical, and then it's becoming something else. And that process, I think, is really, really magical.
Mm-hmm.
And like even when scientists like take different tears from like when people are feeling different emotions, they're crying from like happiness or sadness or whatever, like the chemical composition of the tears is different depending on the
Mm.
emotion that's happening. So it is kind of like there's like some sort of alchemy happening in the body when you're having these emotions, and there's a release that's coming out. Like the substance, the physical substance that's secreted is different depending on what emotion you're feeling. And I mean, as a Cancer moon, I am also have been accused of being a crybaby, and I kind of, I agree. Like if there's any big emotion, my first reaction will always be like tearing up or
Mm-hmm.
crying. And I used to get very annoyed as a child, being like, I don't want to cry. Like I don't. People would like make fun of me or be like, why are you crying? Like it's not that big of a deal. I'm like, I know it's not, but like I have feelings and they
Right.
need to come out.
Yeah. I think we need to stop associating crying with just like being sad, because it's
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
really like all purpose, as we Cancerians can tell you. It's an all purpose reaction to things. Happy, sad, not
Yeah.
in the middle, don't even know what you feel. Cry, just cry. Cry, see what happens.
It feels like I feel like cancers are so sensitive, and we have, I guess, it'd be like think like a bathtub when you're like filling it with water. It's like the emotion, and then at a certain point, there gets to be too much for that vessel, and it overflows. And that's what it
Mm-hmm.
feels like when it just like there's this feeling that wells up, and my body cannot physically contain it. So it has to come out somewhere. And if I
Mm-hmm.
try to push that down and not cry, like I will be irritable, I will lash out at people. So kind of like allowing myself and other cancers kind of like giving us that permission to be like, it's okay to cry, and it doesn't make you weak, it doesn't make you like manipulative or like a crybaby if that's your reaction to things, because it's very natural and human. It's
Yeah.
not, it's not a bad thing to be a crybaby.
And it's the least worst thing that we can be doing in that moment, because let me just tell you, as a Cancer rising, if I'm crying, you should be glad I'm not doing something else, not doing whatever I'm crying about in my head. Because there is this like association with weakness and crying. And this kind of goes into something that I was going to ask next. Have you had readings with anybody who has like maybe the Cancer Mars is coming to mind, where somebody was like, oh, I don't really like that. I don't really like it, feels like, weak, or, not a great placement or anything like that. Or like somebody was like kind of struggling with kind of conceptualizing their Cancer Mars. And I was like, first of all, tenacious as hell, because if you piss off a Cancer Mars, and I'm sure Mackenzie can speak to this very directly, it's like they're gonna grab on to that situation and they're not gonna let go. Like,
No. Mm-mm.
uh, that's the tenacity of Cancer, and I think that's one of the things that gets lost with all of the kind of crybaby stereotyping that can happen.
Yeah, I think of like a snapping turtle. Like if you're bothering it too much and you stick your fingers in its mouth, it's gonna, it's not gonna let go.
Yeah.
Yeah, that can be not my like favorite trait, because I do unfortunately hold a mean grudge. There's people even from middle school that I still don't like because I just can't let it go,
Same.
but it's hard.
Same. Well, the other side of that is that cancers, there is this association with family, which Jen articulated beautifully. It's not necessarily just your blood relatives, although that family pattern stuff is certainly a part of it. But cancer energy tends to really take the people that are closest to them, that they feel are their people, very seriously. So if you mess with somebody that a Cancerian cares about, God help you. God help you, because there is, like Mackenzie was saying, we can hold a mean grudge, absolutely, but like it's that mama bear energy. Like, is there anything scarier than a mother whose babies are under threat? Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's when all hell breaks loose. That's when there's nothing left to lose. And I think this is a really important thing to understand about Cancerian energy, is that it is very protective in that way. It really does care about its people. And so you hurt somebody that they care about, that's a huge problem for a
Mm-hmm.
Cancerian.
Mm-hmm. There's been a
Oh
lot of
yeah.
situations where people have like messed with me personally, and I'm like, oh, whatever, like it's not worth getting into it. But then they mess with someone I care about. I'm like, all right, fuck you, actually. Like,
Yes.
how dare you?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
my
me too.
person. Like, how dare
Mm-hmm.
you?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's Cancer energy is not weak energy, and also it's a cardinal sign, and so our cardinal signs are kind of the starters of the season. So of course, Cancer is the start of summer here in the Northern Hemisphere. It's not energy that needs somebody else to lead the way. It's not like I need somebody to go out before me, and it's just not energy that needs to follow behind anybody. Like if they feel strongly about something, they don't really need the direction of another to kind of navigate that energy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misogyny that gets revealed in how people think and talk about Cancer energy because it is associated with the moon and women and the mother. And those are all positions and identities that are just shit on so much by society or just not taken seriously as like powerful forces that they are.
Yeah.
Like the mother of a household is like the household manager, and there's so many tasks that they do that are just unrecognized, but if they don't get done, then it's a problem. But if everything's running well, then it's kind of easy to be like, oh, like that's just how things are supposed to be, and you can like overlook the amount of work that goes into making a house or a family or a situation good or functioning right. So there's a lot of like emotional labor or just like care tasks that are just seen as like, you know, that's what you're supposed to do, and the energy isn't always respected. Um, but yeah, it's like vital energy to be supported emotionally and physically, and maybe like having clean clothes, having dishes to eat off of, having a meal prepared for you. All of those things, if you don't have those, you cannot go out into the world and do stuff.
Yeah. And having a safe space, having people that have
Mm-hmm.
your back, having emotional security on some level, like all of those things, I think we really underestimate the role that they play socially, because I think we are kind of an emotionally constipated culture.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry to be gross, but it is disgusting.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. So I think Cancerians, there's a bravery with it too, because I mean, a Cancer can start swinging under the right conditions, but like also a Cancer will hold you when you are sobbing and there is snot rolling down your face and it's disgusting, but they're going to hold you through it and be able to deal with emotions in a way, and not every Cancer is, emotionally evolved, but especially an emotionally evolved Cancer is really going to be able to hold space for a whole spectrum of emotions. And I think we really underestimate the power and how necessary that is socially. So let's move on to talking about Capricorn. And Capricorn is, of course, the sister sign to Cancer. So let's get into it. So, Capricorn, it's an earth sign, it is a cardinal sign, it is ruled by Saturn. It is symbolized by the sea goat. Very important to note that it's a sea goat, right? Because, like, what the hell is that? We'll talk about it. It's also associated with the 10th house, and it governs the bones and the joints in the body. What comes to mind when you think of Capricorn energy? I'll start. Daddy.
Yes.
The mommy and the daddy episode.
Literally.
Me and Jen are both mommy and daddy, and I think, like, if you get to know us, it makes sense. We are
Yeah.
mommy and daddy. The duality.
Yeah, I think of like discipline and structure and like methodical and, tenacious in the same way, kind of similar way as Cancer. But they're just like not gonna give up. They're plodding along towards their goals. They can be very yeah, like methodical, maybe a little traditional in the way that they see things. Um, yeah, there's like a sense of authority that I think Capricorns just kind of exude.
We love that. What about you, Mackenzie?
Yeah, definitely the authority like really stands out to me. Just like when they enter a room, it's almost like people just like feel their presence and like automatically like not always, but like it's just like this respect that they can almost like bring in. And I also
Yeah.
think of like just this, they're very responsible, hardworking, ambitious, and like I always think of like the mountain with Capricorn energy. It's just like it takes that slow and steady work to climb a mountain, and you have to have like that goal in sight. And so like they're never short for goals. Just very goal oriented and creating like solid foundations, and they're also good with like boundaries and setting boundaries with people, sometimes too good. But yeah.
Hey, watch it. No, I'm just
Hey.
hey, hey, this is where me and Jen get to be offended because Mackenzie
Right.
doesn't
I'll
have
just
any
offend
personal.
you guys the rest of the episode.
I would honestly love that, Mackenzie. Like, I would love a Mackenzie read for this episode.
Oh my
Give it
God.
to me. And then we've got Jen's Saturn in the background there as well. So perfect
Oh
for this
yeah.
episode.
Yeah.
When you were mentioning the mountain, it made me think about the sea goat aspect of it. And the sea goat, like, what is a sea goat? So it's a goat, the, the head of a goat, and the ass of some sort of fishy mermaid type entity. Obviously, it's not a real creature that we know of.
Yeah,
That we know
it could
of.
be real.
It could be real. It could be real. Anything's possible. And so, what I think of about that is like it can go anywhere, right? It can be down in the depths of the ocean, and it can also climb to the highest precipice of a mountain. And it's about the journey. I really feel like that's part of kind of the Capricorn energy, is this like long process. It's not quick energy necessarily. It's like that slow and steady continuation. And so like if you're going to be journeying from the bottom of the sea to the top of a mountain, it's like you have to have kind of all of the equipment necessary to make that journey, right? I think Capricorn energy at its best is really kind of capable of navigating whatever kind of comes its way and not letting it get in the way of the ultimate objective. So that's what sea goat means to me.
It almost like feels like a crocodile or like an alligator. They are in water, but they can also like be on land. So I don't know. It's like when I first learned about like the sea goat or whatever, it said like they're able to swim those like psychic waters with the tail, but then they're also able to climb the tallest mountains. And so yeah, it's just like it's really a mystical sign, and I think that's
Mm-hmm.
not talked about enough.
Let's
Just
talk about
how
it.
Yeah.
yeah,
Let's
it
talk
really
about it,
is a
because
mystical sign.
yeah,
Yeah.
I love that, because as somebody with a Capricorn moon, it's, quote unquote detriment. None of us use exaltation or detriment in our astrology, and we have good reasons. We can talk about that on another episode. But it's like people do have this negative stereotype towards Cancer moons in particular. And I gotta say, I'm really happy with what I have got with the Cancer moon. And I love what you said, because I do
Cancer moon.
oh, I'm
Capricorn.
sorry. Capricorn moon. Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
I
we
should
think
start
moon
drinking before
Cancer.
noon, huh?
Yeah,
Just kidding. I'm dead sober, guys. Don't worry. Um, not a margarita day today. Not yet, anyway.
not yet.
I like my Capricorn moon is the headline here. Is I don't think that it I think I'm very emotionally aware, and I have a whole chart, so it's not just down to the Capricorn moon, but like I do think that there is the stereotype of like lack of emotionality with
Hmm.
Capricorn, and my
Yeah.
damn moon is Capricorn, and it couldn't be further from the truth. I
Right.
think the thing is that I just don't tend to get my emotions all over other people. I think they
Mm-hmm.
tend to be more contained, and there's a boundary there. Like I'm not just getting into my shit with just about anybody. If you guys hadn't, I
Hmm.
think I've made enough episodes of this podcast. I could have gotten into some more shit than I have had I not had this Capricorn moon. But yeah,
Yeah.
I like the mystical aspect of it. I love that because it does ring true for me.
Yeah. When I think of Capricorn, people do see it as kind of like this emotionless sign, or like they don't have strong feelings because they don't show it as like visibly.
Mm-hmm.
But if you know a Capricorn, you know that they are deeply emotional. They are sister signs with Cancer. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's just like a little bit more remote and removed, but that doesn't mean they don't have those big feelings. It's just kind of there's a container for them a little more,
Hmm.
um, because they do have a lot of structure in their life. Capricorns love, having structure, having things in their places, having like a time and a place for things. So
Mm-hmm.
if it's not the time and place to bring that box out, you're not going to see that. But if you're close to a Capricorn, then and they feel safe with bringing those things out, then you know that they are, just as unhinged as Cancer can be.
Oh, for sure. I think that it is definitely girl boss energy. Unfortunately, I do find myself girl bossing a bit, and I'm like, gosh, shit. But I do think that, like, knowing that there's a time and a place for unpacking emotions, it's like I have other things that are really important to me that I'm working towards long term. And so I think the important thing with Capricorn energy is like just not bypassing the emotions, because they're
Hmm.
absolutely feeling them. They just might be tucking them away because it's like not the right time. But sometimes, like an unhealthy or a
Hmm.
struggling Capricorn, they can tuck stuff away and then forget to go back for it. And then that becomes the
Yeah.
issue, I think. And that, I think, is what people are reading as like, you're not emotional. It's like, well, it's just in the suitcase.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's like this idea of like professionality, and like
Mm-hmm.
when you show up as like your business self and you're like doing deals and stuff, you're not gonna be like, that's not a therapy session, so I
Right.
think Capricorn very very clearly knows like the dividing line between those things, and they're not going to cross over. Like they're not going to be the person that like starts sobbing in a business meeting, unless it's like they've absolutely been holding it in for way too long.
Yeah, that would be
If
a moment.
that would be a sight to see for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's like this expectation that somebody that is cold and girl bossing, like that they're just not in touch with themselves, and that's
Mm-hmm.
usually, just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And there's
Yeah.
like that association with Saturn and it being structure and discipline and those long-term things. It's like if that feeling that emotion right now is not going to get me towards my goal, like then that's like, all right, that's for later, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, let's talk about the Saturn association because I do think that that is part of why the stereotypes about Capricorn are what they are and kind of that harshness. Because I do think that we generally have this issue where, especially in pop astrology, Saturn is kind of considered this like negative force and like people are terrified of their Saturn return. Like, it's just really out of hand. And we are, Saturn lovers here. And one of the important things to remember is that having structure, having some sort of bones to a situation, and remembering that Capricorn is the governor of bones and joints, right? Like the very structure that allows us to take on a physical existence is something that is very Saturnian. Like there is no human existence without the physical, and the physical is very much to do with Saturn. So that
Mm-hmm.
I think we underestimate how much our physical embodiment is a spiritual experience. And that kind of goes back to what Mackenzie was saying about like how it is a more spiritual sign and a more psychic sign than it is given credit for. It
Mm-hmm.
is spiritual to be in a human body, to be this bag of bones that each one of us is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, just like we're learning as humans, and that's kind of like that Saturnian, just like, it won't be easy, but it'll be worthwhile and it'll be worth it. And um, yeah, that's kind of like that. Because it is like it's kind of like a spiritual guide in a way. And I think maybe it's because Saturn's in Pisces right now that I just got that image, but who knows?
well, if you are a person that is approaching their spirituality, having some sort of structure, having people that have some kind of established practice to learn from can be a really important part of how we ourselves can build a spiritual practice of our own, is like learning from other people who have kind of walked the path before us. And I think that's a very Saturnian type of connection that we can have, is like mentorship. Is it can be a Saturnian thing.
I like Saturn as like it's a very spiritual planet to me because it is you reap what you sow. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're putting bad energy out, like you're gonna get, consequences for that. And there's just yeah, like consequences for your actions, good or
Mm-hmm.
bad. Consequences have this sort of negative association when people like evoke karma. It's like, oh, that bad thing's gonna happen to somebody, but it's on the other side. It's like if you're taking care of yourself, if you're doing all the things that you need to do, you will reap rewards for that as well. So it's kind of like just that universal law of like what you plant is what you sow. So,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
and those like the fruits of the tree show you like the character of the person, getting in like that like Christianity part of it. But I steal things from them all the time.
Hey, they steal shit all the time too. So,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
gotta even the score a little bit. Jesus.
So yeah, that's what I see with like I mean, people like malign Saturn and see it as this like great evil, but it's just like showing you very clearly like what you're putting out is what you're getting, or there's maybe some lesson that you need to learn. Um, you know, bad, it's not always that like bad things are happening to you if you're doing bad stuff. I mean, that's just life. Like things
Yeah.
happen.
Hmm.
But in general, there's like that spiritual balance. Like if you're not doing those things daily to kind of keep up your spiritual hygiene or like your spiritual practice, you're not engaging with that, then you're not going to get as much out of it as someone else would if they're like putting in that time every day and have that routine down. Um, that's just the way it works. You can't
Mm-hmm.
just be like cramming for the test the night before and expect to do as well as somebody that's like studying for like 30 minutes every day. Like there's a very big difference in how those things integrate into your body. Like you
Yeah.
can't there's no shortcuts with Saturn.
I think it is a very spiritual thing to return to something again and again and again and again, the way that Capricorn energy is inclined to do when it's something that relates to their long term objectives. And I think that we can kind of dismiss, how doing something over a long period of time and getting that wisdom of just living and doing something over and over and over again.
Yeah, I see Capricorn, they are like, just a little bit at a time. And then, over like 10 years, you get to the end of that and you're like, wow, I have so much knowledge and practical experience of all of these little things that I learned throughout my journey. So I think that's why, practical experience is a very like Capricorn sort of energy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Actually putting like boots on the ground, doing the thing. It's not just like thinking about doing the thing. It's like doing and putting your ideas into practice and making things happen. And I see Capricorn is a very like a builder sign. Like they will like shape things with their hands. Like they have a vision of how they want things to be, and they will put in the time, little bit by little bit, and then by the end it's like they have this amazing stuff. And then everybody's like, oh my God, how did you do that? When did that happen? They're like, piece by piece over the past few years. That's how it goes.
Well, let's talk about Capricorn with Cancer. And of course, these are sister signs. This is part of our sister sign series. And what you were describing, a lot of that could apply to Cancer energy
Mm-hmm.
as well. And it's focused kind of in a different area of life. It's a little bit more internal, a little bit more personal than it is more out in the world, the way that Capricorn energy can be. How do you see the relationship between those two in terms of like putting in the work and building something long term?
I think about it kind of like growing a plant. So it grows like you give it a little bit of water. There's like the top part that's growing up, but then the Cancer part would be like the roots. So there's like
Mm-hmm.
the top part of the plant is Capricorn. That's the visible, very like, we reward in our society like people achieving things in the outer world, like having a good career, getting awards or whatever, having a successful business. And then that's kind of like that top part of the plant. And then the roots are that emotional foundation, the care tasks that are getting done, and that the plant cannot grow out into the outer world if it doesn't have that ability to get the nutrients it needs or the support it needs. So like having emotional support, having physical support, having just somebody that will nurture you allows you to go and grow strong. And so there's like those two sides of it. You need both to be able to be successful.
And I think people can kind of associate Capricorn energy with like being very capable and being very like money oriented. I think that's another thing that comes up a lot with Capricorn. And as we always say, Cancer is financial as well. And has to do with similar areas of life, but just kind of like the flip side, the sister sign side. So it's very hard to build an empire or build these long-term goals if, the roots are all screwed up, if the foundation is a disaster, if there's, wreckage happening internally, it's going to kind of manifest in some way in that external world as well. So, like having both areas of life in your field of view, I think is really important for whatever you're trying to do.
I really liked that like image in my head of the roots and then like the fruit up
Mm-hmm.
top. Cause yeah, I also, not to like go off of that, this is like totally different, but I also just think of like the family aspect, it's like mom and dad. And I think it's important to incorporate like both like Cancer and Capricorn. And I know this is like kind of, it's like trending or whatever right now, but like reparenting. And
Mm-hmm.
I think this is kind of like a good axis for like that reparenting, like you got to
Mm-hmm.
nurture yourself, you got to take care of yourself, you have to, be kind to yourself and protect yourself. But then that's like that Cancer side. And then the Capricorn side, it's like, okay, but you also need like to be responsible and have boundaries and, have discipline. And so you kind of need both in your life. You can't just be like
Right.
overly Cancerian and you can't be overly Capricornian, and you kind of need both.
I almost feel like, especially in media, the girl boss stereotype, like I feel like I've seen a lot of characters depicted that are really like good at their job, but then their like personal life is a mess, you know? That's also that that's like the flip side of
Yeah.
that.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's like it is very important to have a connection to both sides of yourself if you want to accomplish anything personally, professionally,
Hmm.
you need mommy and you need daddy.
Yes.
You need your inside mommy and daddy.
Right.
Yes.
And it's important to say, like, we're saying mommy and daddy, but the reality is that astrology is a reflection of life. And so, depending on the culture that you grew up in, and obviously like any colonized people have had this very, you know, Adam and Eve type of imposition on like what a family is supposed to look like and what these energies are supposed to look like. So the reality is that Cancer is a more nurturing parent, and Capricorn is the more authoritative parent. And so it really isn't, the mommy and daddy part is like at this point it's beyond, it's not gendered in terms of like how we approach it. But a lot of people, if you're looking at very traditional astrological texts, that's kind of how it's portrayed. It is very gendered.
Yeah, I just don't see it being, especially now and like as we've evolved as a society, like we still have the gender roles, but it's a little bit like people can transgress those a little bit more now. So I think
Mm-hmm.
evolving our astrological, how we speak about it, because it's not always that the dad is the one working and then the mom is staying home. Like that's not um, what everybody's experience is anymore. And I think it's a little more accepted that that's, it's okay that it's not like that. So when I do speak about, like Cancer energy, that is like the more nurturing parent, when you see, I was thinking about, yeah, just like our colonized culture of it being like the mother's role being so overlooked, but it's necessary, those that work, like literally reproducing workers for the system. But
Mm-hmm.
it's, that labor, real labor that doesn't get compensated, that isn't, we kind of reward work with
Hmm.
money as like an exchange of value, but the work that mothers do is just as necessary. And we're seeing that now with like kind of our people waking up to the fact like, oh, women aren't having as much kids, like we're going to be in trouble because we don't have enough workers to replace. And I mean, that's just a consequence of like the dying empire. But
Yeah.
anyway, digressing a little bit, but
I do think that it is an interesting axis to look at in terms of, like having this conversation. The culture that we live in here in the United States, I do feel like is very leans very Capricorn in a certain sense. Like it is about, being out in the world, accomplishing things, doing things, making your mark, and individuating in this really strong way, exercising your power over other people. And it is this very negative, I mean, the way that, people here tend to think about that kind of thing is I don't like that. I don't like that boss stuff so much. But I think that as we are progressing as human beings and the conversation is evolving and we're unpacking and decolonizing different aspects of our social structure, I actually think that it's a very interesting reflection of how we view Cancer and Capricorn energy specifically because of that kind of gendered relationship, because our relationship with authority is so much about dominating other people. and imposing our will on other people, and that's negative. And if some people have dads that are like that, and that's a very negative experience. And so you can see how that social aspect plays out in a family unit. Like it's like a microcosm of the society. And so I think as we progress and as we change our idea of like what authority can be, can authority just be leadership? Can authority just be standing up for ourselves and doing things that we feel strongly and passionately out in the world and developing those skills over time?
Yeah.
And then can the Cancer energy be, having a healthy relationship with our emotions and making space for it and honoring, labor that is typically considered, and, not labor, it's considered something that should just happen naturally and is completely taken for granted. I think as we kind of balance that stuff culturally, like it's a very interesting reflection on the astrology as always. So
Just an aside, the the jobs that are typically held by women, like I've worked in female dominated fields and male dominated fields, like I am Cancer Capricorn, but the male workforce, like that workplace, is like they do, it's a lot easier actually to do stuff there than it is in like female dominated industries, even though the females typically we get paid less in those like pink collar jobs versus like blue collar, just because there is a lot more emotional labor expected of like, you know, a lot of women. I guess I'll name some industries, so like nurses and hospitality workers and, you know, like cleaners. Like there's a lot of, it can be backbreaking labor, and in addition you have like an emotional side to it that you have to like do both. But if you're in like a male dominated field, it's like strictly the work and you're not as much expected to manage the emotions of other people. So I think women, you know, to just get the short end of the stick in this society in a lot of ways. And then men are kind of expected not to feel their emotions, or they are very cut off from that very young, and kind of just like through society trained to be like, that's weakness, which we kind of touched on when we talked about Cancer. But
I like to think of like the tradition aspect. I know that's kind of like a Capricorn word, but I think tradition is both like Cancer and Capricorn. And then Cancer is like, our ancestors and things like that. And then when I think of Capricorn, it's like that tradition, like the generations. And I think the generations falls like in between. And I just heard a quote like yesterday, which is why it's so like fresh in my brain. And the lady who said it, I looked her up. She's a Capricorn, but she said that tradition like bridges the gap between generations and it brings generations together. And I thought that was like such a Capricorn thing. But I think with Cancer, there's also a lot of tradition, like passed down traditions and like even like stories that are passed down from, generation to generation. It's just very, I don't know. That's also part of like that family thing. But yeah.
yeah, I think they're both very tied to like legacy in different ways.
mm-hmm. Like our emotional legacy and our physical legacy. And those two things can be one, and they can be very closely related for somebody, and maybe somebody leaves more of one than the other. That's how it goes. That's how it goes. So, well, thank you both for joining me for this delightful conversation on the mommy and the daddy of the zodiac. And guess what? This is the second to last. Our next sister sign episode will be Leo and Aquarius. So we are almost to the end of this series. So I will see you back here during Leo season. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, y'all, let's get into this week. I know it's been a lot of energy. It's going to stay being a lot of energy. And not only do we have Mars moving into Gemini this weekend, but we've also got the Sun moving into Leo early next week. And so what does that mean for you? Well, that means that there is going to be a pretty noticeable buildup of energy over the next several days as we move towards those planets changing signs. But also, we have that Capricorn full moon that I told you about way back when. And that's happening on Sunday, July 21st. So the rest of this week and into next week are juicy. I'm not gonna lie to you, they're juicy. It is a lot of energy. But mostly what I want to talk about here today is that Capricorn full moon. And if you remember, not too long ago, we had another Capricorn full moon. Sometimes that happens. And this one is very interesting. So it's happening on July 21st, as I said, and it's happening at 3:17 a.m. Pacific time. So that's when it starts being full. And then moon phases last for about 3.5 days. So we'll be sitting in the fullness, as we always are, for a few days. So you don't have to wake up and stare at the full moon for it to have an impact on you. Now, zooming out on a collective level, full moons usually have a lot of energy behind them. Even people who aren't into astrology or any of this stuff know that full moons typically coincide with big energy, with people acting out, acting weird. I'm going to say right now that this full moon is going to be extra. It's going to be extra. It's going to be significant. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some big unexpected events go down in the world that day. That does not mean that you need to stay at home and hide from the world. It just means heads up. But again, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, this is 2024. It's just a lot of big events, and we've lived through a bunch of them this year. So I hope by now that you're feeling secure enough in the fact that we know how to ride this energy a bit. And it's a little bit of a different energy. It's new because every full moon has its own particular flavor. But there's a lot of gains to be had with big energy. It doesn't mean just because things happening out in the world are very serious that you individually can't enjoy yourself, can't be planting seeds, can't be harvesting like we do for full moons. And so don't ever look at any kind of transit as something bad is about to happen to you, because even if there are challenges, there are always gains for those that keep their eyes open, that keep their hands open, metaphorically, right? And that's what full moons are about. They are about receiving. So it's very interesting because every full moon is the end of a cycle. We are completing a cycle. So you might look back on the things that you've done since January of this year and take a moment with this full moon to appreciate the progress that you've made. Think about it. It's over halfway through 2024. I bet you've accomplished a few things that you're proud of, maybe more than a few things. So look at what you are able to do in that time. And even if it was hard or tedious or frustrating, you were able to grow yourself in some way over that period of time. And even if it was unconscious, we still plant seeds with the energy that we put out in the world. So we've all grown something. And this full moon is a time to reflect on what you've built so far. So for example, in my world, January was actually the very first meeting of my new moon manifesting circle. And I didn't know exactly how that space was going to turn out. It was new. It was something I had never done before. It was something that I thought people needed and would appreciate, but I didn't know if people were going to actually show up and enjoy what I was putting down. But I did it anyway. And as of right now, the manifesting circle has grown into this really special, intimate space where we can look forward together, where we plant seeds in our lives together. And we do this work of building the future that we want to see for ourselves individually and collectively as well. And we do it together, and there's a lot of magic in that. And so I'm just looking back in awe of what we've accomplished together, what we've built together as a group. And again, this was something that was new for me. It was intimidating to start this thing and build something and lead something that was totally a new thing for me. And I'm so glad that I gave myself the opportunity to play with it, to grow what that space is. Because as a result, I've learned so much about myself, and I feel like the community has really benefited from the space and the information that's shared there and the mutual support that we can give one another. And, as an astrologer, I knew that something that I wanted to do was create spaces where people could utilize astrology, build community together, share resources, support one another. And looking back now, I can see just how very foundational that was, because it really gave me an idea of what I want to grow on a larger scale. So I'm appreciating the road that I've been on since January, but also seeing the zoomed out vision of where that path so far is going to lead me in life in general. So maybe there's something for you, or some things for you, that have had this bit of a trajectory just over the last 6 months. And it's okay if it's still in progress. It should be still in progress. It's your life. It's your life's work. That Capricorn energy is about the long-term vision that we have for ourselves. And so it's really important that as we keep our eyes and our hands open to receive these awarenesses around this full moon, that we do that by releasing the things that are still in the way of us taking more ownership over our lives and our paths and what we're here to do on an individual level. And maybe for some of us, that release isn't something that we can do right away. Like if our job is getting in the way of us fulfilling our dreams, it's probably not always a good idea to just up and quit overnight. But you can release your commitment to those things and also use this full moon as a catalyst to making an exit strategy. So that might be one way that this plays out for you too. To me, this full moon has the potential for us to lean into trusting the process more, trusting the fact that if we don't have that ultimate vision for our lives right in front of us right now, that doesn't mean it's not coming. This is a good full moon to trust in your own capacity to be the architect of a life that feels more connected and more in flow. That just because there are some curves on the road, some twists and turns, that doesn't mean that we're being prevented from reaching that end goal. Maybe those twists and turns are part of the process. Maybe those twists and turns are getting us in a space where we're more ready to receive, more ready to have our day-to-day actions align with that vision that we have for our lives and where we want to take ourselves. Because the clarity that we can get from this particular full moon can launch us into a more aligned space. We can take action that maybe we've never taken before, that is totally new to us, because we're looking at our path and we're like, oh my God, I've been able to do this much already. What the hell is to stop me from going even harder, reaching even further, not limiting yourself and what's possible for you? With this full moon energy, you might also get some unexpected news on what you've been working towards, or see some gains that you maybe didn't even anticipate for yourself. So make sure that you stay open to that, because oftentimes we can be our biggest limitation. We can set barriers for ourselves that aren't actually even there just because of the way that we think about it, or we just don't think that certain things are possible for us. So if you use this full moon energy right, this is breakthrough energy. This is energy that can launch you into a new chapter. But don't forget to appreciate the story that you've written yourself so far, because it got you to this moment, God damn it. And oh, there is so much more to come. So if you are a sponsor of this podcast, keep an eye out for your full moon tarot spread. I like to do those sometimes for patrons as a thank you for supporting this podcast and keeping it ad-free for all of us. So thank a patron. If you'd like to become a sponsor of this podcast, don't forget you get all kinds of special goodies from me as a thank you, and you also get access to the Astro Den, which is the Discord community that I have with astrologers Mackenzie Wollenzine and Jen Russell, who are on this very episode. It's a great community space. We've got memes, we've got Astro Chat, and much more. Sponsorships start at just $5 a month, so for the price of a fancy cup of coffee, you too can support your local radical astrologer. The link to join is in the show notes. That's it for this week's episode. Tune in next week for even more petty astrology. This episode was brought to you by my sponsors over on Patreon.